Excellent. Hello and good morning and good afternoon and good evening to some of you as well. I'm very pleased to be guiding you through this Global Insights webinar on fall armyworm. My name is Alison Watson and I'm head of the Secretariat of the ASEAN Fall Armyworm Action Plan. Before we start the session, I'm just going to have a quick how to use this Zoom platform and how it's going to work today, and a quick practice to warm everyone up. And then our co-host Jo Luck from the Plant Biosecurity Research Initiative, she will give us a formal introduction. Right, if you have any technical issues, and we hope you don't, we may have a few on our end. We're hoping we don't as well, but please check your audio settings by clicking the little arrow by the join audio button at the bottom of your menu. You can also try logging off and on, which usually works best. And you can also send a message to us in the chat and we'll try to help you. Right, today, be really active. That's what we really encourage you to do. We have a lot of experts in the room, so actually it's going to be a very good session if you can contribute to the discussion. If you have questions, we hope you have many questions, and you can even actually answer them yourselves as well. So you could jump in there and get involved. Use the Q&A box, because that means we can see all the questions in one place, and it really helps run the session. Use the chat to make lots of comments to everyone, thank a speaker, share a link of your own research or your own projects, highlight an important point. That's a really useful place to do it. And please make sure you introduce yourself in the chat as well, because it's a great way to see who's in the room and meet your colleagues. You can use reactions if you want to share a reaction quickly. So thumbs up, congratulations, clapping, hearts, you name it, you can join in there. There we go, someone's already done it. And you can raise your hand if you really wish to speak. We may have time for a few people to be unmuted and the ability for them to speak as well. But just be brief if we do unmute you. Right, we're just going to warm up very quickly with a very quick poll. And just so that you know, this poll is not meant to be a scientific poll, and it's totally anonymous. So there we go. You can just have a go. Don't worry. It's meant to be slightly provocative there, because you have to choose a few things that may be sort of provocative for some people. For example, if you believe we need more research on fall armyworm versus more farmer support for all the researchers in the room, I'm sure they're going to put we need more research, but I'm sure there's others that will put more farmer support. There's a bit of competition, or you can be nice and say we need both. Up to you. But you have 3 questions. Have you seen fall armyworm within the field recently? So within the last 2 months. We just want to know if you've been out and about and actually seeing some fall armyworm in the outside there in the field in the last 2 months. Okay. How confident are you that farmers in your country can manage fall armyworm? Extremely confident, confident, not very confident, not confident at all. Maybe farmers won't be able to grow maize, sweet corn in the future because of fall armyworm. And 3, do you believe we need more research on fall armyworm in your country, or more farmer support to manage fall armyworm? So have a go at that. And we're going to see if we can get most people in the room. Got 59% at the moment. Come on, let's get those numbers up. Oh, 70% quickly. So this is a very reactive audience here. We've got 74 people in the room, so that's perfect. And I'm going to end the poll very shortly. Got up to my magic 75%. I'm going to share the results, and let's just see what we're saying in the room as a bit of a warm-up. Should be able to see them now. Have you seen fall armyworm within the field recently? So within the last 2 months, we've got 45% yes, 53 no, and 2% maybe. I'm not sure if it was fall armyworm. So hopefully that will change by the end of this session, or you'll know where to go and get that checked. 2, how confident are you that farmers in your country can manage fall armyworm? Confident, 40%, not very confident, 55%, 4%, maybe farmers won't be able to grow maize, sweet corn in the future because of fall armyworm. So that could be an interesting discussion in our Q&A session at the end for those 2 people. Let's really tease that out and see what we think. 3, do you believe we need more research on fall armyworm or more farmer support? And we need more research as the priority, 29%. We need more farmer support, 13%. We need both. These people are kind to both sides here, 56%, and neither, 2%. So if you say neither or other, feel free to tell us what that is in the chat if you would like. Okay, so that's our warm-up, just to get everyone moving on the Zoom platform. And what we're going to do now is we're going to move through very quickly this session. Just remember to ask your questions in the Q&A box. We've got lots of speakers, and you can actually start writing your questions straight away, and actually people can start answering them straight away. So don't feel shy. Get in there and contribute. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our co-host of the session, Joe Luck, and Joe's going to give us a formal welcome to the session. Joe?
Thank you, Alison, and really excited to be here today. I'm the Program Director for the Plant Biosecurity Research Initiative, and on behalf of our members and the Secretary of the ASEAN FAW Action Plan, I want to welcome everyone here today. And today is about sharing some insights from our colleagues in the US and Brazil on management practices of this pest. So we will hear from our speakers in a moment. Firstly, I'm joining from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I would like to pay my respect to elders past and present, and to Aboriginal elders of other communities represented online today. Next slide, please. Today we have 2 international keynote speakers joining us to share their experiences and insights on the management of fall armyworm. But first, we will have a close look at a situation report from both New Zealand and Australia before we get underway. We will hear from Dr. Joe Huesing from the United States. Joe is an independent consulting entomologist, an educator, and a fall armyworm IPM advisor. Since 2017, he has also served as the US government lead scientist in response to the fall armyworm invasion in Africa and Asia, and has provided expert advice to the ASEAN Fall Armyworm Action Plan. Next, we will hear from Dr. Fernando Hercos Valicente. Fernando is a scientist with EMBRAPA Maize and Sorghum Research Center in Brazil, and he brings decades of experience in biological control and IPM of fall armyworm in maize and sorghum and other maize and sorghum insect pests. So following our keynotes, we'll have a 25-minute Q&A session moderated by Alison Watson. And to wrap up, we have Callum Fletcher, my colleague from GRDC, who will provide a recap of key points to close the session. Okay, next. So I'd just like to thank Alison for the great organisation of this event, this webinar, and to Callum, my colleague, for developing this program. And we will, without further ado, we'll throw over to our first speaker, Ashley Mills from the New Zealand Foundation for Arable Research, to give us an update of the fall armyworm situation in New Zealand. Thank you, Ashley.
Kia ora, hello everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Joe. So like you said, I'm here representing the Foundation for Arable Research, or FAR. So FAR is a levy-based research organisation that supports the arable growers across New Zealand. So as soon as fall armyworm left for response, FAR then initiates the long-term management plan. So we're now in our 2nd full season after response. So this first slide here, so fall armyworm, it was officially detected in New Zealand in March 2022. So it was ironically found on a gypsy moth trap. So following its arrival from Australia, so it's over 1,000 kilometres across the Tasman Strait. Found in that trap. We then found it widespread across the North Island. So New Zealand's geography, it makes us reasonably unique. So looking at the top of New Zealand there, Northland was notified as an area of significance due to its warmer climates. Other regions were identified with conditions as either marginal or entirely unsuitable for a fall armyworm population, especially for the overwintering. We get some really, really low temperatures. However, our diverse geography, it also gives rise to some interesting microclimates, and this really influences the pest dynamics and the management approaches that we have. If you go on to the next slide, please, Alison. Cool, thanks. So this was last growing season. So some of my Aussie colleagues there, you might chuckle that we only found 399 moths in pheromone traps across the whole of the year. You probably get that in one trap in one week. But it really, this shows the distribution of fall armyworm in New Zealand. Right at the top in Northland, that was where it was identified to be able to overwinter successfully, hence it left response and into long-term management. So as I mentioned, compared to neighbours in Australia, our moth captures here remain significantly lower, and we just do not experience the same population levels throughout the season. The peak flight periods in the little graph on the left there. So the line in the green there, so that is in Northland, and that's where we're seeing the bulk of our large populations. So that the peak flights, they correlate to the end of most of the maize and sweet corn crops around the country. We've seen that each season so far, that as the majority of crops get harvested, it's about the same time that we're seeing those last generational flights. Then we just don't have any maize or sweet corn, or very little. It will likely be going on to maize grain. But at that stage, we're just assuming that we're overwintering, or this pest is overwintering in annual ryegrasses or native ryegrasses. It's really a needle in a haystack for us to try and find those, but we haven't found anything yet. So in general, at the moment, we think that fall armyworm populations remain manageable, mainly due to the lack of generations produced throughout the so ongoing monitoring and thresholds they're really critical to seeing what's going to happen later. So fall armyworm, we think that it's only really going to be a pest here at the vegetative state. Past that, populations of Helicoverpa seem to be much more numerous. Again, we have a lot of maize silage crops, so we may be seeing that there's not a great deal of damage, and we can actually go to no chemical applications in some areas due to the fact that it's for a silage crop. If you go on the next slide, please. Cool. So this is our current growing season. So across the country this year, in general, we've had crops get in the ground on time. So nothing too late. We're only up to about 15 confirmed reports. We've only had one moth in a surveillance trap, but we did miss the first moth flight. Sorry. Yeah, we missed the first moth flight there. So we did find populations that were much more advanced. Only one fall armyworm moth captured. Maybe that could signify very, very low moth flights, or maybe the pheromones that we're using here are just not really applicable to those low numbers or the climates that we have. So in comparison to the last two seasons, we're actually running about 2 to 3 weeks earlier for the first emergence out of winter. We've experienced some quite late instar larvae that I would imagine are already in pupation.
30 seconds, Ash.
Okay, thanks, Alison. If you go on to the next slide anyway. So the key challenges and where we're heading at the moment. So really, we're identification and grower education. That's one of the key things for us. The support from the regional agronomists has been fantastic here, but the identification and what to do next has been quite challenging. So development of New Zealand specific thresholds. That's another direction we're taking. So we might be in a position here where sometimes doing nothing is the correct thing. And some of the other things there, just strengthening the surveillance networks. So really, in conclusion, Alison, yeah, thank you. So if you, New Zealand's diverse geography, the smaller populations, and what we think that we can really manage it here. We've got really good collaborative research efforts, and on this project, we're working really, really closely with Vegetables New Zealand, MPI, Ag Research, Plum Food, Scion, the universities. There's a huge range of people available to us to give us really good guidance and direct the research where it needs to go. So it's also been a really pleasure to interact with some of the experts around the world. Heidi's just on next, so she's one of those ones. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Ash. Thank you. And thanks for the smooth introduction to Heidi. Heidi Parkes is going to now talk to us about a quick update around the fall armyworm status in Australia. Heidi.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Alison, and thanks, Joe, and hi, everyone. So in my role with the Queensland Department, I'm leading a national fall armyworm extension project, which is funded through Hort Innovation. We have a team of researchers and extension officers who are working with growers and agronomists on the ground to develop new knowledge and tools for managing fall armyworm, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. So a brief update on fall armyworm in Australia. Fall armyworm has been an established pest since it arrived in 2020. Infestation levels have fluctuated over 4 years. There were major crop losses early on, particularly in sweet corn and maize, and largely because growers were uncertain about how to manage this new pest and were caught somewhat off guard. There were major losses again last summer, when infestations in maize and sorghum were the most severe to date in Queensland and northern New South Wales, and other crops like winter cereals and pasture grasses came under threat for the first time, and that has caused some concerns about the expanding pest impact across other industries. So to date, the most affected crops are sweet corn, maize and sorghum. White French millet, oats and barley have been affected to a lesser degree, and there's a growing list of crops like green beans and brassicas and so on, where fall armyworm has been found, but the level of impact is uncertain. So next slide, please. So fall armyworm is found in all Australian states and territories except for South Australia. If we look at this map of the predicted fall armyworm risk, which was published in 2020, it's turned out to be a reasonably good representation of risk across the country. So the orange in the north is the zone where populations can persist all year round, and this includes locations like the Bowen Burdekin in North Queensland, where there have been major crop losses. As you move south along the eastern seaboard into the yellow zone, where populations are thought to be able to persist for most of the year apart from winter, there are places like Emerald, Bundaberg and the Lockyer Valley where fall armyworm has had a considerable impact for growers. And then moving further south into New South Wales and into the green zone, the pest populations have been generally lower and more manageable. Next slide, please. So what are the approaches to monitoring and managing fall armyworm in Australia? Fall armyworm is managed by growers and agronomists at an individual farm level, so rather than by any national or state coordinated activities. There are a couple of industry-funded projects that monitor populations through small-scale pheromone trapping networks, as well as a new real-time monitoring network that is being established by AusVeg's VegNet program. There's also a project to monitor insecticide resistance, which is funded by the grains industry and led by the New South Wales Department. There are no genetically modified grains or sweet corn in Australia, so on-farm management is reliant on insecticides with the addition of some virus products. And this is costly for businesses and unsustainable in the long term. Most growers are aware of the risk of resistance and the challenges that they will face if they lose one or more available insecticides. Some growers do talk about using IPM programs, but they have limited tools available. So let's look at the actions and research happening in 2025 to address the fall armyworm challenges for Australian industries. So in April this year, we brought together growers, agronomists, researchers and funders from across industries for a national fall armyworm research development and extension symposium to identify investment priorities for managing fall armyworm. So the list of research gaps and needs included tools for biopesticides, thresholds, host plant resistance, as well as area-wide management strategies and understanding of fall armyworm population drivers and host plant preferences. An important outcome from the symposium was a shared understanding that addressing the fall armyworm risk in Australia will require a cross-industry approach. And this has led to the development of a national fall armyworm research coordinator position by Joe Luck and the Plant Biosecurity Research Initiative, which will be implemented next year. So there are several industry-funded activities that are already underway and are addressing some of those gaps and needs that were identified through the symposium. So, for example, in our National Fall Armyworm Extension Project, we're carrying out demonstration trials in the Bowen Burdekin and Lockyer Valley regions, including on things like pupae busting, biopesticides and sweet corn varietal tolerance. Next slide, please. So this last slide shows other key industry investments that are underway. Some I've already mentioned, and in the interest of time, I won't go through them. I have included links to more information throughout my presentation, which you should be able to access from the PDF version of these slides. So finally, you can find the latest fall armyworm research and information on the Engagement Hub and the beat sheet, and you'll find the QR codes for those at the bottom of the slide. Thanks, Alison.
Sorry there, I got a little bit frozen. Hey, thanks Heidi. That was a perfect introduction. And if you've got questions for Heidi and Ash already around what's happening in New Zealand or Australia, or you want to follow up, just please ask in the Q&A, or also you can add your work around what you're doing in the chat as well. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to move quite quickly into Joe Huesing's presentation. And Joe, I've actually got your slides here. Would you like me just to move through them?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. You just
That's the
tell me
best thing
next.
to do.
You just tell me next slide.
Okay.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you everyone for inviting me to make this presentation. I do want to say up front that the Fall Armyworm campaign, although I'm making this presentation today, is possible because of a lot of different people. In particular, I want to acknowledge Dan McGrath and Paul Jepson from Oregon State University, who have been partners in this Fall Armyworm campaign now for over 5 years. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to put a map up here very quickly, just to give us a bit of perspective. You know, Australia and the continental United States are roughly the same size. I do want to point out two things, though, on this slide. If you'll see where the word Brisbane is, right above the B is the state of Kentucky. That's that funny state that's got a bunch of squigglies around it. And then if you look at where the W is at for Washington, D.C., right to the left, that's the major corn belt of Nebraska that I'm going to be talking a little bit about today. So Nebraska, Iowa, and Kentucky, just to point that out for everybody. Next slide, please. So fall armyworm's obviously new to Asia. It's not new to the Americas. In fact, in the U.S., in particular, North America, we've been fighting this animal since literally the birth of the nation. J. Abbott was actually sent to the United States before it was the United States from the Royal Society, and he was the first guy to actually develop pictures of the fall armyworm and describe that damage. And then Townsend Glover, who was also a British immigrant to the United States, was an employee and entomologist in the patent office. We didn't have a USDA yet. Our Department of Agriculture started in the early 1860s, was one of the first people to really put together control measures for the fall armyworm in North America. There were a series of bulletins that were published 1917, 28, 29, all the way up into the release of synthetic pesticides in 1941 by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that describe how to control the fall armyworm. So again, it's a new pest in your part of the world. It's an old pest in the Americas. Next slide, please. So a couple things I want to show you on this slide. The first is, where did the name fall armyworm come from? So If you look at the two stars, Texas and Florida, in South Florida, the fall armyworm, the maize strain, is endemic year-round. And in South Texas, the so-called rice strain, which should actually be now called the range strain, I can explain that later if people are interested, are endemic in those two regions. And then as summer comes into the North America, and corn is planted starting in April, May, late June to July, July into August, the fall armyworm will move north, and it arrives in that main corn maize belt in the fall. And so farmers started calling it the fall armyworm long ago. What's interesting about this map's actually quite old. I think it was first illustrated in the 1930s or 40s. But in those days, when you talk about monitoring, what farmers would do is send a postcard to Washington, D.C. I have fall armyworm, and then by telegraph, extension agents could be informed as to what to do. Next slide, please. Much of what I'm going to talk about today is written about in detail in the Fall Armyworm Guide for Asia. USAID paid to put this together with CIMMYT. What I can tell you is all the chapters in that manual on good agricultural practices, integrated pest management, and pesticides are taken straight out of the playbook that would be used in the Americas for control of fall armyworm, using synthetic and other types of pesticides to control this pest. So it's freely available online. You can always go look it up if you wish. So how is fall armyworm managed in North America? And there's really three things that have to be in place. First is knowledge. You know, farmers and extension people have to understand what this pest is and how it acts and its biology and all those kinds of good things. There has to be a toolbox, synthetic and biopesticides, conventional host plant resistant lines of maize. And importantly, policy is important. In my experience around the world with fall armyworm, the single biggest factor impeding quick control of this pest were government policies. I can give an example. In the Americas, as I said, we've been managing this pest for a couple hundred years now. Farmers pretty much use GM maize mostly to control this pest, but there is still a large conventional and organic maize industry in the Americas that rely on other tools. So it can be managed without GM interventions. It's not easy. The organic industry, for example, in South Florida may treat with pesticides up to 12 to 25 times a season to get effective control, but it can still be done, and it can be done economically. And I'll talk about that in a second. Next slide, please. The context that we use, I'm pretty sure everybody on this call will recognize this, is the standard good agricultural practices IPM model. Except with this pest, it's even a little bit more important than it is with other pests. It's a bit harder to control. You have to have your ducks in order, as they say. This is based on cultural control methods, standard soil health, planting dates, things like that. But I also want to remind the audience, especially when I talk to policymakers, the protection goal here is maize grain. If I'm a corn farmer, I'm interested in my grain. That's what I'm interested in. Everything else is secondary to me. So the use of improved maize varieties, conventional or GM, whatever your policy allows, implementing those in a smart manner so you can serve biocontrol agents, which are important with this pest, and only using pesticides then when they're necessary and economical. Over. Next slide, please. The maize variety matters. In North America, almost all the germplasm is bred for lepidopteran resistance, including fall armyworm resistance. That's even non-GM materials bred for that purpose. But I can tell you outside the U.S., what we found is a lot of maize was not bred for fall armyworm resistance. And this is just some pictures here at the bottom from CIMMYT that has screen material in Africa. And, you know, the stuff at the bottom that they originally were using was not resistant. And they very quickly were able to identify lines that are pretty tolerant to fall armyworm. Next slide, please. The key with this pest, if you're going to control it economically, is field level scouting. Farmers have to get out into the field. They have to assess whether the insect is present, and they have to decide how to act and when to act. And this process, as described in the manuals I said earlier, is based on that using the Americas. But you have to be able to identify this pest usually before you can actually see the insect. We teach farmers to identify the pest by the damage, not the actual insect itself. This is critical because this insect is actually pretty easy to control if you catch it early. Next slide, please. This is just a figure we put together to show the relative sizes of the different 6 instars of the fall armyworm. Each box is a relative representation of the size of this pest. And within the first and second and third instar, you see there to the left, this insect is pretty easy to control. It's pretty easy to kill with even some pretty simple insecticides. BTs, neem oils, things like that will control it. The key is to actually get out and find the insect in time to control it before it moves into the world of the plant where it's protected. Next slide, please. I do want to point out that in areas where this pest is endemic, you can have multiple generations of the pest present in the field across the season. So what we did here is we just put this slide together showing the growth stages of maize. This is a 100-day maize. There's a potential in a 100-day maize growing season to have up to 4 overlapping generations of this pest. And it's important for farmers to understand how to recognize the early stages of an infestation when there's overlapping generations, and they'll look different. So for example, the seedling stage infestations look like cutworm damage. Tassel damage is usually associated with poor seed set. And then, of course, especially for organic or sweet corn growers, the reproductive stage where you get cob damage. Next slide, please. I very briefly want to go through the rationale for the next couple of slides because control of fall armyworm is an economic decision. And it's based on the value of the crop's yield potential, the potential damage that the pest causes, and the cost of controlling the infestation. So this is usually showed with a figure that describes what's called the economic injury level and the economic threshold. In a nutshell, what you want to do is control a pest at a level before the density of the pest becomes economically damaging. That's the key. And almost all pest entomologists and agronomists and economists work out what that level of infestation is. They call these action thresholds. And they say, if you go into your field and you've got this level of problem, you need to do something if you want to economically control it. And I'll show you a couple examples of this in the next slide. So I'm going to just show you two different scenarios here. These are data from Minnesota, Wisconsin area. So an organic row crop producer on a per acre basis normally makes something on the order of $325 income off of that acre of corn. Conventional grower gets about half that. So already when you go into the discussion with your growers, you need to know these kind of numbers because that tells you what sort of intervention costs you can incur to control this pest at an economic level. So obviously organic maize is worth a lot more. The market value is higher, so your options are actually greater than they are for somebody who's a conventional row crop grower. Next slide, please. So what I want to mention very briefly are these action thresholds. Normally for most places in North America, an action threshold of somewhere between 15 and 25% infestation in the field is considered an economic injury level that would warrant an intervention. But it doesn't have to be like that. So in the state of Nebraska that I showed you up front, farmers in that state are willing to live with up to 75% infestations before they implement controls. And these data are worked out with their agronomists, et cetera. So at the bottom here, I show, for example, data from South Africa show that even 13% yield infestations could lead to an economic loss. And it also, as I mentioned, in much of North America, 15 to 25% is usually the economic level that, or injury level, infestation level, sorry, that where an intervention will be implemented. Next slide, please. This slide is meant to show you just one thing. If you went to the state of Nebraska and you had an infestation of fall armyworm in your field and you wanted an intervention, you would go to a website and you would pull up somewhere on the order of 25 different pesticide solutions that you could use. So for example, I just blew this up here. You got, chlorantraniliprole, for example, is a very common seed treatment that's used, might have been one of the options. Next slide, please. So just to give you kind of a sense as a practitioner how you would look at this, if I had a field in Nebraska with this level of infestation, in my mind, the calculus would be, well, I could treat this with methomyl. That's around $10 per hectare. I could have, per acre. I could have treated it with chlorantraniliprole, a seed treatment. That's around $30 per acre. If I had an organic field, again, its value is much higher. Well, okay, it's more expensive to treat. It's around $100 per acre. So the idea here is you have to understand your clientele. You have to understand what crop they're growing. You have to understand its value and then apply the mitigation choices as a function of what the return on their investment is. Next slide, please. What we developed over at USDA Aid to help in this process for countries that are just now engaging with the fall armyworm campaign, so we came up with this thing called the CSAS model. What's important is what is the cost of the treatment? What is its efficacy level? Safety is obviously important. Is it even accessible? GM crops, if they're not accessible, you might as well not even discuss them. And is it scalable? So for most practitioners who are first starting in this process of fall armyworm, cost and efficacy are the two biggest ones. And in terms of research, it's two of the things that the research community needs to get their head around very quickly in terms of managing this pest effectively. Next slide, please. I want to just very briefly talk about monitoring. In my experience around the world, monitoring was way oversold. It's not necessary. It's expensive. It's expensive to maintain these traps. And then you have to ask yourself what you do with the data, because trapping data doesn't correlate real well with the farmer level experience with an infestation. So considerable resources were spent globally putting these traps out into the field. In much of the Americas, for example, in the state of Kentucky, where I'm from, they only keep 2 traps for the entire state. And mostly they use those traps just to wake farmers up if they've got the infestations that fall armyworm starting to show up in the state. They'll advise farmers to start checking their field because a lot of farmers don't routinely check for these. So it's important to realize, to appreciate that the use of trapping is mostly a field level practitioner decision, not really a country level policy decision. Next slide. Rain's important. This pest is actually pretty easy to control. And 2 things that where traps are important is they kind of tell you the trends of populations. Are populations going up or the populations going down? Weather forecasts are also important. This animal can move up to 1,500 kilometers, mostly because of weather fronts that push it. And so the weather patterns are important as are rain forecasts. Next slide, I think, might be the last. So just in summary, if you want to manage this pest, you need to have the knowledge, what the pest does and how it acts, action thresholds. You have to have the tools kit, obviously. Policy is important for those who are engaged in policy. The easy place to start is with the CSAS model. How much does the control cost? How efficacious is it? Is it safe, accessible, and scalable? Thank you.
Thanks,
May,
Joe. Thank you so much. And Fernando, I'm going to introduce you just now, but I'm just wondering, do you want me to? I've got your old slide, not your old slides, but your slides from yesterday. If you want, I can
Yeah.
use those.
Yeah, you can use those, please.
Okay, thank you and so much. And thank you, Joe. We'll come back to you. Just a quick reminder to everyone. Joe raised lots of good points in there, and I know stakeholders in Australia and New Zealand have been thinking about some of those points that Joe has talked about, particularly monitoring, for example, economic thresholds. I saw some of your questions and your registration around that. Why don't you take the opportunity now and ask a question in the Q&A, and Joe can actually look in that Q&A and actually start answering any questions you may have. So meanwhile, Fernando, it's welcome and it's great to have you with us. So please start.
Okay, I work at EMBRAPA Brazil and Sorghum. First, thanks for the invitation to be talking tonight, and I'll try to pass some experiences that we have been for the last 4 decades. And I work at EMBRAPA Brazil and Sorghum in the southeast of Brazil, that it's located in Sete Lagoas, Minas Gerais state. Next, please. So Brazil is a tropical country, and we have in many regions like 3 crops a year. And this situation creates a green bridge among these crops. And fall armyworm may attack more than 180 crops and survive and reproduce from peanuts to grasses and everything. So we have a huge production, but at the same time, a huge problem with many insect pests. Next. So we work mostly with fall armyworm, Spodoptera eridania, Spodoptera cosmioides, and in cotton and soybeans also, soybean looper. And it's very easy to identify fall armyworm with this inverted Y in the forehead. And it's very clear here in the first picture. Next, please. Well, this is not what I sent you. Okay, fall armyworm. So it's a very important pest in Brazil. This is the main characteristic of the damage in the field. And this is the place where it used to have a treatment sprayed with water, so it may eat everything from all leaves and all the plant. Next, please. This we can see the inverted Y in the forehead, that it's the major characteristic to differentiate when it attacks the corn plant in the bottom. Next, please. The life cycle is around 30 days. It's a temperature dependent. So in the lab, we get about the same as in the field. And it's easy to rear, but it's really hard to control. Next, please. For the fall armyworm management, you can use chemical control, cultural control to expose like pupa to high temperatures, damage pupa during plowing, biological control. People use trichogramma and some pathogens like baculovirus and Bacillus thuringiensis and some fungi. And of course, transgenic maize. We recommend different genes, proteins expressed in this maize. And I'm gonna just talk briefly about the maize that we developed at EMBRAPA Maize and Sorghum, the first Brazilian transgenic maize against fall armyworm. So we have, for the biological control, the parasitoids, they rear like, it's used trichogramma, Cotesia, and some others. Some predators like ladybugs, sucking bugs, and lacewings. Like the capital of the state is about 4 million people, and they distribute ladybugs and lacewings homes. And we work, my area of work is mainly baculovirus and Bacillus thuringiensis, but it's also in the market, Wolferia and Metarism. Next, please. Baculovirus, it's efficient. I'm gonna show in the end some of the products that we have developed. It's you have to use healthy caterpillars to multiply this agent. It's you cannot use fermentation system so far. Bacillus thuringiensis, we can use rice as substrate, like solid fermentation. We have a project in Africa, and in Brazil they use mostly large-scale fermentation systems like liquid fermentation. I'm going to show you some pictures. Trichogramma is an egg parasite. Rear the host and infect and distribute in the field. Pheromone is just for monitoring the presence of adults. And fungi, as I said, both Wolferia and Metarism. Next, please. Transgenic maize. So we have the first transgenic Brazilian maize with CRY1DA gene from our Bacillus thuringiensis collection. It's very effective against fall armyworm. It's developed. It was developed at EMBRAPA Brazil Sorghum and Helix, a Brazilian private company. Now it's beginning to some commercial trades with China and Europe. Next, please. So for successful application of biological products, timing is the most important. So the product application time, it's after 4 p.m. or if you have a formulation with UV protectant. The spray should be between 100 and 120 liters per hectare, and the pH, the water pH, about 6 to 7. This is because you have to, BT and baculovirus must be ingested, so you have to get a very reasonable amount of water when you spray. And spray 1 week after plant emergency. We are having, like in Brazil, heat waves last year, this year. So if you wait too much, you just have overlapping sizes, and it's a really big problem. Next, please. I'll try to talk a little bit about biological control with baculovirus from the perspective of what we got so far. Next, please. So we have a baculovirus collection for soybean looper, the first one. We have many isolates for fall armyworm, that it's the pink one, and in the middle one. And we have also for Helicoverpa armigera and Helicoverpa zea, the last two hanging on the artificial diet. So this baculovirus collection, we get those in the field. And we study and sequence most of them, like the DNA. Next, please. For baculovirus, for fall armyworm, we have mostly, EMBRAPA has mostly negotiated with private companies, isolate number 6 and 910, and they are very different. Isolate number 6 does not disrupt the integument of the dead insect immediately after death, and the 19 disrupts the integument. Both were sequenced. Next, please. We also try different types of formulations for our final product, and we also have a wettable powder, 50 grams per hectare, with a certain amount of PIBs, polyhydra, per hectare, and this I can explain later how we do that, but we try different formulations in our lab too. Next, please. Biological control with Bacillus thuringiensis, that it's a BT with that they have a spore and they develop a crystal that it's toxic to insects, many insect orders, different orders. Next, please. So we have a BT collection that we collected about 2,000 samples of soil, grain dust, and from different Brazilian states. And we have today more than 4,600 isolates. and they are kept in different buildings and freezers, -80 and -20. Next, please. We also have a soil collection at EMBRAPA maize and sorghum that we use to get some other type of fungi and bacteria like Bacillus subtilis, amylo, and some others. Next, please. We tested all BT isolates against some specific insects, like fall armyworm. The best isolates were negotiated by EMBRAPA with private companies for large-scale research and development. Private companies signed a contract with EMBRAPA, developed their own formulation, registered, and placed it on the market. EMBRAPA also develops with our lab our own formulations, IPM, and biological control field trials, and monthly survey of fall armyworm. Next, please. So we have with BT the isolation, identification, bioassay against the insect pest, the target, pilot scale fermentation system, and we transfer that to the private companies with large scale fermentation systems. Next, please. So this is, we are trying new equipments. These huge bags are, you can grow up to 4 strains at the same time. They are graphene plastic bags, and they are sterile, so you can control with a computer in the mid, and they do not contaminate, and everything is sterile. So we are going to start that on March 25, like next year. Next, please. We have a project with New Zealand, and develop New Zealand's, the name of the project is Developing New Zealand's Climate Resilient Integrated Pest Management Strategy Against Fall Armyworm. So it's going to start in January 25, and it's a bioprotection, biocontrol, the New Zealand Institute for Plant and Food Research Limited. So they got in touch, we start talking, and we approved this project, and we are going to New Zealand next March, and they are coming to visit us also March. Next, please. You're going to see Argentina, and it's a 2-year project, and they are gonna, we are gonna try to exchange knowledge about IPM practices, including biological control for farm armyworm, and they will like enable us, this is from the project, to develop a climate resilient IPM program against this invasive pest and tailored for specific for New Zealand. So we are they are going to come to visit us, and Argentina, we are the major they just stated that our laboratory at EMBRAPA has all the necessary resources and tries to provide them some knowledge about biological pesticides. We have about 13 biological pesticides developed in our lab, that it's a biological control laboratory at EMBRAPA maize and sorghum, and they are registered to date, as well as access to field stations for IPM trials. Next, please. So we have this product. I just try to do this table with the products that we developed in our lab and the pests in the mid and the company. So Acera is for 2 strains of Bacillus for Spodoptera and soybean looper, and developed by Balagro. Crystal is for Spodoptera, and they are going to increase the pest. So by Lalimand, former Farroupilha in Brazil. Cartuchovite and Baclonate and Destroyer, Virmix, Spodovir Plus, Vir Control. They also have clones to other companies. They are all from, except for Spodovir Andermatt from Switzerland, and they are produced in Canada. And we also have for Chrysodaxis, Vir Control CI and Vir Control HI, that is Silicover parmicera, all developed by Symbiose in Brazil. Next. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Fernando. That was excellent, and it gave us a really good rundown of all the work that you're doing, and particularly all the products that you've been developing in that biocontrol space. I think you said you had 13 biological pesticides registered there. How many, I mean, what's the best one? Have you got a standout biological pesticide or biocontrol option out of all those that you've shown that really works well, or is it a
All of them.
combination of a few or all of them?
Yeah, because we have field trials twice a year in very hot places, like where you have like tons of like foul armyworm, and we do for spray. For example, the first one, baculovirus, the second, BT, the third one, BT and baculovirus, and the fourth one, baculovirus. And we do that with commercial products that the company developed with our strain, and we also use some treatments with our own strains and our own formulations, and they are all going well. But as I said, we had to redefine the timing. We start
timing.
spraying 1 week after emergency. Otherwise, it's lost. It was
Excellent.
not like that in the past.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean it wasn't like that in the past? Are you
In
saying
the
that?
past, for example, like 20 years ago, we started spraying for foul armyworm about like 20 days after emergency, 25 days. And after that, 15 days after emergency. So I think that the temperature is getting like higher and higher. Last year, the place that I live, I think that it was never 40 degrees centigrade. And it was for like 1 week. So I had a field trial. So irrigation system, I said, we have to just like do that 7 days after emergency. And it was the right decision. We got to control that. Okay.
Great, thanks for that, Fernando. That's very interesting. And it brings us into our sort of open discussion session. So if you've got cute questions, please, I see some are already answered, so somebody's been busy. Please put them in the Q&A. And Fernando, that's really interesting. And just on this question, we have a question here from Melina, and it's, can you say anything about the relative efficacy of your MPV and BT products and those available currently in Australia? So do you know?
No, not in Australia. I think
Yeah.
that most of these are available in maybe from Andermatt and Lalimat, that it's a Canadian and Swiss company, but
Yeah.
the Brazilian companies are trying to do that in US, Spain, and Africa, South Africa, as far as I know. That's the commercial part, but that's as far as I know, not Australia, and so far, as far as I know.
Excellent, thanks, Fernando. And on that, Melina, we've actually used the Forlagen and the Sumitomo BT in our demonstration project in Vietnam. And we had varying results, but we did have very good results from the BT product that we used in Vietnam. So it'd be interesting to see your experience, and maybe we'll unmute you later on. You can just give us a few thoughts on that question. Here's a question from Barbara from the National Crop Protection Center in the University of Philippines. They have MPVs virulent to fall armyworm. Is it possible to collaborate with you, Fernando? I'm sure I can put you in touch.
Okay, yeah, you can.
So that's excellent.
Okay.
I've got a question for Joe, actually. So Joe, if you want to just join in, and I might just move around the room. So please put your questions, everyone, for everyone there. We've just got a quick question. Actually, I'm just going to go back to you, Fernando, just about, well, actually, this might be for you, Joe, around fall armyworm. Where does it hibernate in the US? So what's happening when it's not in? This is a question from the audience. I can see it in the chat. I guess, where is it hanging out when it's not, for example, in the right season? So in your case, it's migrating up, and then it gets cold, and then what happens?
Yeah, so the fall armyworm in the US is endemic in two spots. It's endemic in South Florida. And I think most people know Florida, that, piece of the US that sticks down towards Cuba. So southern Florida, Miami area, south, it's endemic. But with global warming, it's been moving north every year. So
Yes.
there are winters now where it's endemic year round, much further north, up near the state of Georgia. And that's the maize strain. The rice strain, so-called rice strain, which we're being asked to now call the range strain, is in southern Texas. And likewise, it's also, with global warming, is moving further north. So in those South Texas and South Florida area, it's endemic, and people grow maize and other similar crops year round, and they have to manage it year round, much like Brazil does. In the rest of the US, it's a function of warming temperatures in the summer and weather fronts in particular.
Thanks. And Joe, just while we have you right there, farmers, as you said, it's really important for farmers to manage this at the field level. In the US, are they great at doing that? I mean, how do you encourage farmers to do that? Because I've heard sometimes, you've got to get out there within the first 3 days or the first 5 days and get on top of this pest, or at least start seeing it. So in the US, how does that work? How do farmers get out there, or do they?
There's a couple different ways. So very large farms, or farms that have very high valuable corn, like the organic industry or the sweet corn markets that go into supermarkets, they have professional scouts and pest control advisors that do that work for them. They check it a couple times a week or weekly because it's such high value, and the potential for the risk is very high. In those markets, in those states, it's highly likely they're going to have some insect pests. We always talk about fall armyworm, because earworms also out there. So are the borers. So those kinds of farmers are checking pretty regularly. As you move into the Midwest, I'm from the Midwest, and farmers we're a bit lazier up there. So we don't always get out and check the fields when we should. And you rely on the extension service then. This is where monitoring is helpful. That have these few traps across a region that can say, farmers, you know what, we're picking up fall armyworm. You probably should get out and check your fields. We're starting to see them come into the area. And then to alert them to get out and check those fields. But again, if it's high value corn in those regions, like supermarket corn, sweet corn, going into those markets, farmers are much more likely to be checking with regularity than say farmers that are raising field corn for grain.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. And a question for you. We've discussed this before, and it gets back to your slide around good agricultural practices, but you've found in some places that the soil management, maybe the pH of the soil, can make a difference. Can you elaborate on that? Maybe both of you, if that's true. Maybe you first, Joe.
Yeah, so maize or corn, like all crops, has an optimal set of conditions that will produce a plant with the highest yield and with the most robust defensive structure. And pH is a pretty important one. And this is one thing we learned from our colleagues at EMBRAPA, because we do a lot of work in Asian countries where the soil pH is very acid, and maize doesn't like that, and it doesn't grow well. And I know the folks in EMBRAPA told us when we were working in Africa, if you can't convince a farmer to correct the pH in their field, I don't even want to talk to them, because it's just going to be difficult to grow a good maize crop that's resilient to this pest. It's less of a problem in developed countries because most farmers do soil testing, and they know the amount of NPK to add, and they do that pretty judiciously. It's not such a big issue, but I would say if you have a client that you're working with that wants to hesitate on inputs, probably not the best place to cut costs. with this pest.
Fernando, thanks, Joe.
No, yeah, he's right. And we also tested the levels of nitrogen in soil and pH. And of course, he's right. It's you have to have a good crop for you to be resilient to this pest.
Okay, and we've got a question actually just on that, Fernando, is a question about soil too, about summer soil temperatures in northern Australian cropping regions can be as high as 60 degrees Celsius, yet the fall armyworm are still destructive. What sort of soil temperatures are you achieving for pupa destruction during cultural methods?
I think that it should be higher than that, but because when you do the cultural method, you just like scrape and you just wound the pupa. That's the point. Temperature, they just get the pupa can resist 60 degrees. That's what we get now during our summertime. And not in soybean, it's different when you do that because it depends on the region and on the crop and because soybean you have like shades, but corn in the beginning it's kind of a harsh, but it resists.
Excellent. Here's a question for you, Fernando. The literature from South America suggests that Telenomus remus is a more efficient parasitoid than Trichogramma species, but you didn't mention Telenomus. So is Telenomus produced commercially and is it released in Argentina and Brazil?
Yeah, it is produced, but I don't work. I used to work with parasitoids in the beginning. After that, I just realized that BT and baculovirus would be a little bit easier. You just can freeze that and work later on. And there is a researcher in EMBRAPA here in Sete Lagoas that he works with parasitoids. Yeah, and he does rear Telenomus. EMBRAPA today, this kind of bio inputs or biological control agents, it's about 30% a year, the increase in rate. So I have pictures of like huge fermentation systems and the huge biofactories where they produce Telenomus. Yeah, it's very efficient. She's right.
And why is that? I mean, just in the US, is that happening? I'm assuming that's not happening to such a degree. So why is it such a big growth in, well, I may be wrong, Joe, you can correct me, but what's driving that growth in the development, use of the biologicals in Brazil? Fernando?
Me?
Yeah.
I think that in the beginning, we did when I started, I was really young and biological control was also in the beginning. And we didn't have the beginning, the middle, and the end. Today, at least like in EMBRAPA Basin Sorghum, we can provide the full package. For example, the good isolates that we have been looking since the 80s. We can provide a formulation, a good one, and we can provide that efficiency in the field. So I think that today we have all the pack together. This package is ready. And we just keep like looking for new isolates. But this came up after 2012, after the introduction of Helicoverpa armigera in Brazil, that it was a disaster. Billions of dollars were lost. And in an emergency of the Ministry of Agriculture, they imported baculovirus. What I did was I collected lots of Helicoverpa armigera in the beginning before they imported. I surveyed about like 5,000 larvae, and I got 8 baculovirus isolates, besides the BT isolates that we had in our collection. So after this 2012, that it started to, everyone started using because of the introduction of Helicoverpa armigera.
Excellent. That's interesting. Just thinking about these biocontrol that you have developed. There's a specific question here, Fernando, around how MPVs are applied to the field. Are they standalone or mixed with synthetic insecticides?
You can mix that. There's no problem in the tank.
And
But
how
you
are
can
they
also
normally applied?
just baculovirus. Sometimes some farmers are afraid. They don't check the leaves, like Joe Huesing just showed in the. You may not see the larvae, but you can see the damage. So the larvae is there. So they just mix half and a half, like chemical pesticide and baculovirus. But when I start a project, I always use solely like baculovirus or BT in the beginning, and it works pretty fine.
Excellent.
But you may not skip the first spray.
So timing.
Otherwise, they just overlap, and it's a mess with this temperature. It's a mess.
Excellent. Well, not excellent. I mean, that's very interesting. I think it stresses
Yeah.
the point around the timing is just so crucial. I'm gonna ask Tay soon just to unmute. I'm gonna ask him a question about resistance because I see he's been answering quite a few questions in the background. But before we do that, Fernando, there's a question here around, and I get this question a lot in webinars as well previously, but around resistance development of fall armyworm against BT insecticidal proteins. So what strategy do you use to delay or prevent fall armyworm resistance to BT?
You mean to BT crops?
I think it's actually,
Or-
yes, BT crops.
You
Yeah,
have to have a high dose and plant refugee. So when we got to isolate the CRY1DA gene, you have to optimize the codon that's like in the DNA for you to express and kill 99.9% of the population. You have to express that 25 times more protein than the usual protein. So you must kill the heterozygous in the field and plant refugee area. So you can, because imagine like Brazil is like tropical country, you may have like 10 generations a year.
Yeah.
At least in the US, you have snow, you have kind of something in the bit. We don't. So in 4 years, you can just have a kind of a resistance. So at least you have to follow some rules like high dose and plant refugee. That's what we try to do. And we did that with this BT Max from EMBRAPA.
Excellent. Interesting. And that was from Barbara. So Barbara is from the Philippines, so they do have BT crops there. And I think Indonesia are starting to get BT crops there as well. Joe?
Allison, I just wanted to interject for the people that are asking the question about biocontrol. So we divide the biocontrol world into two buckets. One is just what we call inundated biocontrol. This is where you raise these parasitoids in a laboratory and you release them. And then there's just the standard biocontrol that you try to protect in the field. And the challenge with all insect pests in terms of raising parasitoids for release is an economic business model. It's very risky. So you can play this game. You can say, well, what's the total number of hectares I have to protect? What's the total number of parasitoids I would have to release to protect those acres? And then how soon would I have to start raising those larvae before the growing season? Because, Fernando and I have both raised these animals in a lab. It takes months to get that population built up for release. And now I've got billions of these insects to release. And what if the problem doesn't occur? Look, my business model just died. And that's what happens to a lot of the biocontrol people. They, in an outbreak year when there's infestations everywhere and everybody's panicking, the money's there to support that, but to do that long term is a very, very risky business model. And that's why you tend to see it used mostly like in the screen house industry, the glass house industry, things like this, less so in production agriculture. It's not that it can't work or it won't work. It's a very risky business.
Yeah,
Over.
that's a really good point. Thanks, Joe. I'm just going to hand over to, I've asked a few people from our audience to maybe make a comment or ask a question. I'm going to give that honour to Francis McDonald from Plant and Food, New Zealand. Francis, you should be able to unmute yourself. I'm just wondering if you wanted to make a question or make a point around your work or some of the discussion. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
That's fine. That's fine. You can hear me all right.
Yes.
I have to say, probably the biggest thing I've learnt today and the most concerning thing is around the hosts other than maize and corn. In New Zealand, when we first were responding to fall armyworm, we did identify potentially from 350 species what might be at risk in our native estate. But then it became very clear that the strain that we have seems to be very specifically still staying on maize and corn. So I don't know who this question is for, but at what point did it start moving on to other things? And, you know, was it 3 seasons in or, yeah, I'm a bit shocked, to be honest, to see that it's going on such a range of things.
Maybe Fernando?
No, Joe, please.
Joe. Go, Joe.
Well, I tell you, so when you have an outbreak year of an insect pest, I wish I would have put this picture on my slide deck. I took it out, but I have a picture of a shipping container that has fall armyworm eggs laid all over the side of it. And so these moths they'll start laying eggs everywhere. And if they don't hit a cornfield, they'll lay them on onion plants. And when we first had the outbreaks in Africa, we have fall armyworm on probably 30 different plants. I can't think other than sorghum that we ever had anything that was economically at an economic injury level. But if you get high levels of the pests, they'll land almost anywhere. And fall armyworm's a noctuid. And those noctuids can eat almost anything that they land on. But the question you want to ask yourself, is it a level that's consistent, persistent, and is it economically damaging other than, it may just be a one-off? You always want to be looking for the weird event where an animal takes a turn in nature and suddenly becomes a pest on another crop. That can always happen, and you want to be aware of it. But I don't think we've seen that happen with this pest yet.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for
Thank
answering
you.
it. Thanks, Francis. And actually, there has been a bit of chat, but unfortunately, it's gone to the hosts and panelists, but we may share it with everyone anyway. But it's just some discussion here around the damage on ginger. It's a 10-month crop, typically planted from mid-August, with mature ginger being harvested from June onwards. And unfortunately, they're facing intense fall armyworm pressure from the time of the crop emergence through to April, with the resulting crop losses can range from 10 to 50%, which leads to a solid 7 months of pest pressure. So just sharing that in the chat, there's a bit of discussion. It's going to the hosts and panelists at the moment, but we'll share that maybe in the notes of the meeting. But there are some other crops facing intense pressure. Seems they like ginger there, which is, I like ginger too, so not surprising maybe, but no. I'm going to actually ask Melina. Melina, you've got the opportunity to, and you're doing some fantastic work, real kind of leading light in this area in Australia. So Melina, do you have a question, or do you want to make a comment, or do you want to share something around what you're doing at the moment? If you're there, Melina? While we're waiting, oh, Melina, there we go. You should be able to talk now. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
you
yeah,
can.
yes, I can hear you. Yep. Go for it.
I just thought while we've got Joe and Fernando, one of the big differences with Australia is the absence of GM, BT, maize or anything else other than cotton, really. And I guess when cotton came in for GM cotton was introduced for Helicobacter armigera control in particular, that sort of underpinned the suppression of the Helicobacter armigera population. And I guess we don't have that advantage with fall armyworm. So I wonder whether, if you think about a system without that sort of suppressive effect of a GM crop across the landscape, what you think the relative potential is of biologicals versus insecticides in our system.
I suggest biologicals. That's but if you want also like biologicals and you can mix that. What you have to have in your in mind is that we have cotton in Brazil, so they have fall armyworm and cotton and maize and some other crops. But if you have to spray two biological one biological pesticide for two insect pests in the same crop, like soybean looper and fall armyworm in cotton, if it's baculovirus, you have to get the full dosage recommended for each one, because baculovirus is a little bit more specific. But we also have developed BT that works fine for both baculovirus and soybean looper. So that's what you have to have in mind, because I heard someone saying about Helicobacter parmigerus somewhere. So yeah, probably you may find some BT sprays. I was a little bit surprised for the price that Joe put, like in the US, like $100. But it's not the same price in Brazil. It's of course, our money does not value like dollar, but it's not like that. We work a lot with the medium to grow BT, so we always try to decrease the price of. We have to have carbon, nitrogen sources and mineral salts, and this is not very expensive, so we try to do that at a very low price. But anyway, so for different, you just have to look if you have another pest associated in Australia in this area for you to use. But I can recommend either like BT or baculovirus mixed in the same tank for fall armyworm. There's no problem with that. You have to be careful with biofungicides. Okay, in soybean. That's the problem.
Thanks, Fernando. And timing. Very important. Joe, Joe, anything to add?
Fernando's right. I want to make sure people understand that slide I showed with BT and the organic industry. A big part of their costs is because they go right to the cob and they treat they actually treat each cob, so it makes their labor costs go way up. If you were a conventional farmer spraying BT on a field, it's a lot cheaper. I always pick methomyl because in the Midwest, that's what most farmers use because it's cheap. It's the cheapest thing they can use. And at the end of the day, you go to an individual farmer, the world's different than talking across the whole area. They're managing their farm and their pricing, but BTs can be a very effective spray, and they can be applied economically, and they are used even in conventional corn production. There's no problem with that. I think if you want to start talking about area-wide strategies, there are area-wide strategies to help reduce fall armyworm problems. And for example, there's literature out there on various cover crops that are preferred in and corn growing regions. These are typically legume type plants that the fall armyworm doesn't like, and so those are often recommended for farms in off season and as part of their fallow system. So you can certainly do that. And and area-wide suppression processes using, for example, inundative pheromone releases and MPVs and parasitoids are also are options that can be used. I just always like to remind people there's a world of difference between this is my cornfield and I have to manage it and I have to pay for it versus what everybody else does in support of that. It's two different perspectives.
Excellent. That's a good note to leave it on. Apart from, I wanted to ask both of you, I mean, is fall armyworm manageable? We had that. Can farmers manage it effectively? Maybe just sum that up, just quickly answer the two questions. Joe, is it manageable? Will it be manageable in the next few years? Even though there may be sort of boom and bust sort of type things, the cycles of fall armyworm. What's your feeling? Farmers can do it?
Absolutely. Everywhere the fall armyworm showed up, the scenario has been the same in the last couple 100 years. It's devastating, it's visible, it's easy to see. People panic, but reason comes into play. The tools are brought together and farmers learn how to manage it. I have no doubt that you'll manage this best.
Thanks, Joe. Fernando, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, manageable, and we can manage that at least. Many people do that when they using like biological pesticides. When you have some kind of a weather change, you may use some chemicals to help, but yes, it's manageable, and we have a huge industry, thank God, behind that today in Brazil, and with parasitoids and BT and baculovirus, and yeah, it's totally manageable.
Excellent, thanks, Fernando. And I was going to ask Tech to just maybe just so we can see you, Tech. But Tech, we don't have time now, but I just wanted to say there's a lot of questions that Tech has answered in the background about resistance. And just to see your face, Tech, thanks for helping out, because I see lots and lots of questions answered, and some really interesting information there around the resistance work, what they've been finding out in many of their studies across the region and across a lot of the Southeast Asia, but also further afield. So thanks, Tech. And what we'll do is we'll actually, I will grab lots of those Q&As and I'll put them into a document and I will circulate that. You will have a copy of the presentations, of course, and we will make some smaller presentations. Thank you very much, Fernando and Joe, but I want to pass it over, and we've got probably about 2 minutes. We're going to go over probably by about 3 minutes, actually, because I wanted to pass it over to Callum just to give a quick summary or his key thoughts of the session. Callum.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you guys so much for the discussion that we've had today. I've taken a bunch of notes, but we don't have time to go through them all. But what's really come across to me is the importance of timing and of scouting and to know what is happening exactly in the crop, your specific field. You're right, Joe. It matters about what's happening on farm, and I think that's really important. And if we can develop the tools to get that right, then this variable approach that we take with economic thresholds really comes into play. And that's, I think, how we are going to create a system of manageable system going forward, and a more sustainable system going forward. So that's great. Thank you for the update from Ash about New Zealand, and I'm very, very sorry that it made its way over there, over 1,000 kilometers. But these things do have, as you were saying, Fernando, the ability to travel such long distances, and particularly in adverse or bad weather conditions. I think, Australia has got a lot to learn from both Brazil and the US and elsewhere in terms of taking that area-wide or holistic approach to management. And I think we're not hearing anything new from you guys. Sorry, that sounds terrible. What you were saying, we are taking on board, And I think really we can learn a lot from the previous experience from the Western Hemisphere. So thanks so much for that. I have just a couple more points to make. I'd like to promote the engagement hub that QDAF manages. The link was sent out before, but if you Google Fall Armyworm Engagement Hub, you'll be able to get Australia-specific information about management of fall armyworm. And also great to hear the mention of the beat sheet, a wonderful website funded by GRDC that has a lot of information around that. Now, recordings will be made available of this, and also a PDF of the presentations will be being made available as well. So we didn't have time to write down everything. Hopefully there's more resources there to go through. And also finally, that Fall Armyworm in Asia guide, Joe, that you mentioned, I think we would love to be able to have a look into that, because you're right, it sounds like it's got a lot of great information. So I'm going to finish up there and turn it back over to you, Alison.
Awesome, and thank you so much. And yes, we will definitely send those links, and I can definitely say that the beat sheet, I've used that work for our work in ASEAN as well, and across Asia. So it's fantastic, all that stuff that's happening there. And I will also give a plug for that IPM manual, because it's very practical, it's very well written. So that's exciting. And what is also exciting, Fernando, is your work in New Zealand. So we will be back hopefully next year, and to find out how that's going. I'm quite intrigued, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that would like to find out more about all the development of those biological options. So you'll probably have a lot of follow-up. So thank you so much. That brings us to an end. Thank you so much to everyone, all the speakers, everyone, our co-host, of course, with Joe. Thanks, Joe. And the people that have helped in the background, Zatamel and Leandra today on the chat, and those that have joined us, Ashley and Heidi, and even Tech. So thank you, and thank you, Callum. And that's an end, and we will see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.